Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Biodiversity in Achieving Sustainable Development Goals, Interdependencies and Pathways for Policy Impact. My name is Mónica García Quesada, and I am a project manager at the European Science Communication Institute. And along with my colleague, Larissa Marcus, I will be moderating this session. We are bringing together voices from 4 EU-funded projects: BIONEXT, BIOTRACES, BIOTRAILS, and CLEVER. These projects are examining the critical connections between biodiversity and sustainable development. They are all part of the Transformative Change Cluster, which is a group of 12 EU-funded projects working together to support better decision-making and stronger biodiversity policies across Europe and also beyond. Today's session will discuss how we can make biodiversity a central part of decision-making for the Sustainable Development Goals, and also we'll examine whether the SDG framework truly captures the critical role of nature. We are joined by 4 fantastic speakers, each bringing their own expertise. We have Audra Balunde, who's the head of the Environmental Psychology Research Center at Mykolas Romeris University in Lithuania, who will present her research in the context of the BIOTRACES project. Thank you, Audra, for being here today. Then we'll hear from Elizabeth Diaz General, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany. And she will talk about her research findings on the interactions between land system variables and biodiversity as part of the BIONEXT project. We will hear also from Neo San Juan, who's professor in the Food Technology Department at the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain, who's part of the CLEVER research team, and we'll talk about biodiversity footprint in Brazil. And we'll also hear from Jean-Christian Polania-Giese, who's a senior manager at Adelphi, who will present his insights as part of the BioTrail EU project on value change perspective. For you should know that the webinar is organized into 2 main blocks with 2 speakers in each block. And after each of the blocks, we'll open the floor for questions. So feel free to share your questions in the Q&A channel that is available in the webinar, and we'll come back to the questions after the presentations. We have also prepared a few questions to get to know our audience a little bit better. Some of these questions are very, very easy to answer, where some others are statements that are perhaps intentionally provocative to encourage a deeper thought and discussion. But the first question is very easy, and I hope I can launch it right away, and concerns where you are based. We are interested to know the geographical spread of our audience. Well, we have people from Spain, from Germany, from Brazil, from France, from Belgium, from Germany. So is Czechia okay? We have an interesting spread, mostly European, but also from Brazil, which is interesting. Okay, I will close the poll and get back to the topic. Okay, so thanks for that. We will propose a couple of little questions like that throughout the webinar, but now let's get started with our first speaker, who's Audra Balunde, and thanks for being here. The floor is yours. You're welcome to share your screen and to discuss your research. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for organizing with this interesting webinar. And I will share my slides right away. with the hope that they will turn out fine. And yes, so I started to share my slides and just wanted to double check whether you see them in a presentation mode. Monica, could you please tell me whether you see them in a...
Yes, all perfect, thanks.
Okay, amazing, thank you. Okay, so hello everyone. As Monica already mentioned, I am Audra Balunde, and I am currently leading the Environmental Psychology Research Center at the Mykolas Romeris University, which is my main base for research. And additionally, I am doing a postdoctoral internship at Kaunas University of Technology, and I am also connected with the Environmental Psychology Group at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. The work I'm going to present is based on the BIOTRACES project. BIOTRACES is all about supporting transformative change, that tackles the deep-rooted causes of biodiversity loss. The project does this through an action research approach, which means working closely with real-world initiatives to explore solutions, learn by doing, and support meaningful change from the ground up. One of the project tasks were to explore to what extent biodiversity is interdependent with other sustainable development goals. So to explore this, we looked across different case studies and focused on two key questions. First, how does progress on the SDGs like health, food, or climate depend on biodiversity and the continued flow of ecosystem services? And second question was, how does the recovery of biodiversity itself rely on reaching those other SDGs? So one might think that we already have a great deal of theoretical research papers, as well as policy documents, such as the one you can see in the slides, that explore these relationships between biodiversity conservation and sustainable development goals, suggesting that we kind of know that biodiversity is extremely important for achieving other sustainable development goals. But at the same time, in these very same sources, we find a lot of critique to SDGs, and one of the most prominent being that they are too general concepts and detached from local contexts and specific situations. So to explore this claim, we ran a survey among our project partners that represent 8 European countries and 9 case studies. The survey included questions of both qualitative and quantitative nature. Each research team was asked to fill the survey collectively or in some other way, but that would reflect the opinions of the whole team. When filling in survey, we asked people to think of the case studies and how SDGs emerge or perhaps do not emerge in their day-to-day work with the community. Case studies are extremely different and represent different sectors, including food production, greening schoolyards, sustainable farming and herding practices, conserving river biodiversity, forest management, and sustainable lifestyles. Because cases are so divergent, they create perfect conditions to explore how in these different and very much contextual circumstances, relationship between biodiversity and SDGs plays out. So first we asked those who participated in a study to self-evaluate on a scale from 1 to 10, how well they understand the concept of SDGs, and results varied from moderate to very high. Next, we asked how concept of SDGs in general is relevant to their case studies. For some cases, it was very relevant, while for other, not so much relevant. Further, we asked to indicate how much individual SDGs is relevant for each case. The longer the SDG bar you see in the picture, the greater it is relevance to the case. And we already see that variance across cases is rather outstanding, perhaps except for food park and nature-inclusive building case. Overall, people see that not all SDGs hold importance. So these results allow us to overview the general situation, to further understand why this is the case, So if we would like to further understand why these differences are so big, we would need to look deeper into the case and ask participants why they think the way they indicated in the survey. Next interesting exploration is how frequently stakeholders in each case study mentioned the SDGs during the interactions with researchers. So by saying stakeholders, I mean any person or group of people related to the case in question. These might be community members, politicians, authorities, local or national, public figures, and so on. But just please bear in mind that each case had very different stakeholders, and I'm only mentioning some examples. So the results show that indeed sustainable development goals were mentioned rather rarely. Only in one case we see that happening relatively often. And here we explored two key questions. So first, are non-human entities like ecosystems or specific species seen as meaningful beneficiaries of sustainable development goals? And second, do local communities experience tangible benefits from ecosystem services and biodiversity improvements? The responses revealed very interesting pattern. So for non-human entities, the results were highly inconsistent. In some case studies, nature clearly stood out as a key beneficiary, while in others, it wasn't mentioned at all. So even the average score landed at 5 out of 10, with a full range from 1 to 10, and it pointed to a fragmented and context-dependent perceptions. But then the role of local communities was much more consistent. They were frequently seen as central beneficiaries with an average score of 7.8. And even the lowest rating was 4. So across the board, people tended to recognize clear human-centered outcomes. What this shows is a pattern we often see in sustainability discourse. So even when nature is central to the work, the perceived benefits kind of skew towards human stakeholders. And that not necessarily is a flaw, but it does raise a question of whether environmental goals are being framed primarily through a human benefit lens. So if we want to ensure that ecosystems themselves are not just a means to human ends, but are also respected as entities worth investing in, this is something we probably need to keep in mind. And next, the results from qualitative part of study shows that across the case studies, many participants saw a strong link between healthier ecosystems and progress on social and economic goals. So improving biodiversity wasn't just seen as a win for nature, it was connected to food systems, livelihoods, community well-being, etc., etc. But it wasn't all in alignment. Some participants questioned whether ecosystem services actually contribute to SDGs in a meaningful way. In sectors like forestry, the connection was often missing or unevenly addressed. Others were raising concerns about the concept of ecosystem services itself. From the perspective seeing nature as a set of services, risks reinforcing economic exploitation and undermining biodiversity in the long term. There were also critique of language. A few participants felt that terms like ecosystem services are too technical and may not help us rethink how we relate to nature in more creative or responsible ways. So overall, there's kind of a real potential with these concepts, but also a reminder that not everyone sees ecosystem services as a clear path toward sustainability, so the framing matters. And moving on, across the case studies, people agree that bringing back biodiversity is closely tied to progress on other goals that can't really be separate. So, for example, when herder communities are financially stable and supported in using sustainable methods, they also might more likely to help restore nature too. And also tackling poverty and creating decent jobs reduces the pressure to overuse land and resources. Another example is education was also seen as important. For example, when kids learn about local environmental issues like how river dams affect river health, it can shift how families and communities make everyday choices related to the river biodiversity. And there was also awareness that bigger issues like youth leaving rural areas, corruption, or weak institutions can quietly block progress. And they may not seem directly related to ecosystems, but they really shape what's possible. So biodiversity recovery was rarely seen as a goal on its own. It was part of a much wider web of social and economic changes that all feed into how we care for the land and water around us. Yeah, and next we are moving on limitations of SDGs. So please note that we didn't ask for limitations of SDGs in our study, but they naturally emerged from qualitative content from the interview. So while the SDGs were designed to reflect complex, interconnected global challenges, many participants felt that this interconnectedness often gets lost in practice. The goals are seen as too broad, abstract, difficult to apply meaningfully to complex local realities. Several pointed out that the SDG framework can feel artificial, like something that has to be forced into a project rather than something that naturally aligns with real-world issues. The language itself was also seen as vague or declarative, making it hard to translate into concrete action. A deeper critique emerged around the idea that SDGs are more about maintaining consensus than driving real change. So instead of pushing for systemic transformations, we tend to reinforce existing economic models, promoting efficiency tweaks rather than questioning the model itself. And lastly, participants raised concerns that SDGs oversimplify social dynamics. So they often fail to reflect lived experiences, don't actively promote empowerment, and remain relatively invisible outside academic and institutional settings. Okay, and the last but not least, recommendations for policy that emerged from the study. So first one might be tricky to implement, but it goes like this. So we kind of advise to improve impact. SDG strategies should be adapted to local contexts, not applied as one size fits all. And next, nature should be recognized as a key beneficiary, not just a resource for human use. Also, definitions of ecosystem services need to be more inclusive, especially of marginalized communities. And then biodiversity goals could be linked with broader social goals like reducing inequality or promoting justice. And finally, the SDGs need to be more practical and transparent with tools people can use and space to question the framework limits. Yes, and I'll stop here so you can see the full contributor list to this outcome. And please bear in mind that these are the reflections of research teams, how they see and comprehend SDGs, but it must say that these reflections seem very much in line with what we can actually encounter in scientific literature. Yes, thank you. And I stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Audra, for this very short presentation of a very rich research from what you indicated. I'm sure there are questions for you, but I think we'll go directly to the second of our participants before we go into the questions after the first block. So I'd like to invite now Elizabeth Diaz General, who will present her research in the context of the BIONEXT project. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Monica. Can you see my slides? Because I can see you.
Yes, we can see them. Thanks for that.
Thanks. So thank you for being here and for making the space to hear about this topic. My name is Elizabeth. As Monica already said, I work at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany, and I'm part of the BIONEXT project. This project is an innovation and research project which has in the center biodiversity in order to build or achieve sustainable societies. So the Nexus approach is one of the key elements here, and also combined with a transformative change approach. So all this together with a co-creation process, together with stakeholders to make a contribution to science policy interface. The biodiversity nexus here, as I said, we have biodiversity in the center and all the other nexus elements that represent different sectors, such as water, food, energy, health, transport, climate, have interlinkages with biodiversity. And the idea is that the policies of each of these sectors also mainstream biodiversity as part of their decisions and actions. In terms of transformative change for the biodiversity, we consider this as a system-wide changes that guide scaling up and mainstreaming of sustainable actions and practices across societal sectors to address root causes of biodiversity loss. In Work Package 1 of BIONEXT, we have the modeling of the Nexus interlinkages that is part of task 1.3. And there we are developing a Nexus modeling framework, which is composed of three main models at European scale. One of these is CRAFTY. This is an agent-based model on the land system. We also have AIP, that is an integrated assessment platform, also for the land system. And we have Juniper, that is a system dynamics model. So all these three combined provide different inputs to assess the Nexus interlinkages. That is one of the main roles or purposes of this Nexus modeling framework, to be able to model the Nexus interactions, these under the co-created scenarios and pathways to simulate the impacts of direct and indirect drivers on biodiversity. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on CRAFTY, which is the model that we developed here at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. But before going more in details on this, it's important to note what is the role of the models within BIONEXT. So across the 4 years of BIONEXT, we have one stakeholder workshop each year. We started with the first one in 2023, where stakeholders develop SSP scenarios, starting from the European SSPs. SSPs are shared socioeconomic pathways, but adding or enriching this with biodiversity components and all the Nexus element components. Last year, we had a second workshop in which stakeholders develop transition pathways in order to achieve the nature positive visions that were developed under the nature features framework of IPBES. And these pathways are linked with different actions to achieve those visions. Both of these generative narratives that were used in the Nexus modeling framework, and now they are going to contribute to workshop 3 that we are going to have in 2 weeks. To reinforce and to improve the pathways in order to achieve these visions. Then we will test them again in the modeling framework and to finally propose policy actions in this order. So as I said, we are currently here. So what I'm going to show you are preliminary results of our work. And so for this presentation, the main question is what the modeling Nexus interlinkages tell us about the SDGs. So to understand this, we started from these co-created scenario narratives, which were interpreted and quantified, and in order to be able to model them. And just focus on CRAFTY Europe variables, we started with 2 main types of variables that this model considered. It's a group of socioeconomic variables, for example, education, formal education, household income, healthcare, etc. And another group of variables is related to nature contribution to people of the 3 main types of, that is material, non-material, and regulating. So these variables were considered in the context of the SSP narratives developed together with the stakeholders and the NFF pathways, and also through a lens of quality of life that is a more holistic understanding of human-nature relationships. So we assess or evaluate the situation of the SDGs in using these inputs. And this is showing how, for example, fragmented world looks like. So when we have negative inputs about biodiversity, almost everything else is negative. Also, when we consider the indirect drivers, for example, that are also negative, then we have a really red or bad world. Because we have food that is depending on biodiversity, we have a health that is depending on biodiversity. However, this is if we look at 2030, so this is the time target of the SDGs. But if we look after this, in this world, since there is a fragmented governance, at some point the system is not able to continue exploiting the natural resources, and that means that by the end of or after 2050s, for example, or by 2100, biodiversity start to recover. All these triangles that you see without a filling color means that they change the direction. So we will, by the end, after the 2030, we will have a better situation for biodiversity, starting to improve, for example, water conditions and so on, all the other all the other components of the nexus elements. For this also, but there are things that are not evident if we just focus on the SDGs, like, for example, impacts on identity. So all these negative aspects also are reflected in the identity of the communities and the society in general. So negative impacts for that as well. In a more economic and extractivist world, we have some positive aspects as well. So, for example, more money to reduce poverty, or to give access to education and healthcare to everybody, etc. But it is also an extractivist world. So that means that there are things that are not going to be positive in the long term. So if we just stop at 2030, we can say, okay, this is not that bad. But after that time, if we really want to be sustainable, we have to also look further, because there will be more negative consequences for this. And there are also hidden things in this context. So, for example, there is a strong negative impact on social cohesion here. All these elements come from this quality of life framework that I mentioned before. And what about a sustainable world? We see that when biodiversity is positive, all the other elements are also positive, with some exemptions in some cases, but this basically means that the things that are hidden here also, that are in terms of that to achieve this sustainable world, we need to change traditions. For example, we need to change community or have a stronger community, and we also need to change our diets in order to be in this world. So now, doing a similar exercise with the transformative pathways, we see that all the SDGs have a positive contribution in these nature positive worlds, maybe with the exception of SDG 8, because in this values perspective, growing economy is not the main focus. So there's still some growing, but for example, in nature as culture, they propose well-being economy. In nature for nature is the growth economy, and in nature for society, there is a circular economy. So maybe it's something that, in order to have all positive evaluations for all the other SDGs, we really need to change our economic system and not thinking on growing anymore. But there are also other things that are hidden here. Again, if you just focus on the SDGs, and it's related to identity, for example. So in nature for society, we see that there is a loss of identity because all the decisions and making more efficient use of the land system that makes that people are losing the connection with land. So there are a lot of lands that are abandoned, for example. That is a reaction that was reflected in the model. But in other values perspective, we see that improvements, maybe a bit lower values, but there is a better distribution of the index. In nature as culture, as a similar situation, but maybe not achieving highest distribution of this. And this make wonder, under these transformative pathways, we should accept a loss of identity and maybe start adopting a new identity. And this lead us to justice aspects. For example, is that just? But if we talk about justice, it's just justice for whom? Maybe we, under these transformative pathways, we should to start thinking on more about the common goods and more than individual or society or specific communities aspects. Finally, this is also work in progress. We have the more specifically all these variables assessed in terms of how they contribute to different aspects of quality of life. So this is the case, for example, of biodiversity. And the important thing of this framework, the quality of life framework, is it's considered also the non-human world. So, for example, when we talk about positive aspects for health, we are also thinking on positive aspects for non-human entities. The same with social relations, considering also multi-species or interspecies interactions, same with freedom and justice, etc. There are, of course, these interactions or biodiversity also has some negative aspects, particularly focused on humans, for example, diseases that can bring a higher connection with nature, or maybe also the access to these spots of biodiversity that is unequal for all people. So finally, some messages to take home. We have to think on the temporality. So also, if we want to achieve sustainability, we have to go beyond 2030 and also think about the space. So beyond local. So what are the consequences of achieving sustainability in one place? What are the consequences in other places? And we for sure have to change this SDGs focus probably to a more holistic view for transformative change policies, for example. And some of the ways that we are using and proposing is having this nexus approach and interlinkages, incorporating values systems, also incorporating this justice lens, incorporating cultural or considering cultural aspect or co-culture, so also how these interactions with non-humans create culture and, of course, the non-human world. So, yeah, I think that I exceed my time. Sorry for that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, again for a very enriching, very rich research from the BIONEXT project. We have now time for questions and answers. I would like to invite the audience to write their questions and we'll refer to the questions. But before, perhaps to bring some food for thought, I'd like to also ask you to propose a poll and to get your views on that. And perhaps I will ask both Audra and Elizabeth to tell us about how they answered that poll, perhaps as a way of initiating the debate for a short period. The questions, it's something that you have both touched upon. It says that a global framework like the SDGs should be applied consistently across regions, even if that means overlooking some local nuances. I wonder what you would answer to that, what our audience will answer. And because both of you have referred to these trade-offs or critical tension between the global and the local, and I wonder what your views are about that.
So yes, if you like, I can start. So my response definitely is that I strongly disagree because I think we kind of need to find the way to the context, actually. And perhaps the way to achieve this could be for those who kind of develop sustainable goals or curate them, like United Nations and certain certain departments, they might perhaps want to kind of put efforts into understanding different regions of the world, starting with this, like Europe, some African countries, some American countries, and then perhaps maybe going deeper even into like smaller regions, like countries, like concrete countries, and see what's going on there. Because what we really emphasize in our project, that there might be like indigenous knowledge, there might be like some knowledge systems that are not widely accessible to other people across the world. So that's why we really need to put efforts and to find the way into these local contexts. So that would be my kind of more general answer, but I guess for this context, it's enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I also strongly disagree, basically because every context, they have this their own needs and their own interests. So that should be this more local conceptualization of how to assess the SDGs. However, we still should try to look for what will be better for most of all, because in some cases, okay, achieving sustainability in one place will mean reducing sustainability in other places. So we also have to look at that. So all these teleconnections between the different local situations. So it's a kind of hybrid, but for sure we have to start also focusing on what is the local context of its place.
Thank you for that. I see that this is a contentious issue. I don't know if you have seen the answers of our audience. You can see in the chat. I think we have a diversity of answers. So I think this is something that could bring some debate. We have a question from our audience. Who's asking, to what extent are SDGs not just incorporated in projects or initiatives, but also localized and appreciated by people in different countries? So I think he's pointing also at the diversity at the local level and in different countries. So perhaps if you would like to answer to this question.
If possible, I can also briefly comment on that. It would be very similar to what I said previously, but I just perhaps want to kind of say what is the situation in my home country, which is Lithuania. So not only in the context of the BIOTRACES projects I'm part of, but also like in general working in academia with the policy stakeholders. I have kind of a feeling that SDGs are kind of they are not kind of forced, but people not exactly feel familiar and close to these SDGs. They're kind of a bit artificial. And I think they are very important and they are touching upon extremely important points, but we need to do something about that fact that this alien feeling towards them. So we need to kind of tame them to the extent in each context that they become like part of the system, because they are really pointing out very important issues. So yeah, thank you. That would be my response.
Elizabeth, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, just to add that I think that they are in fact really important, but as we both find in our projects, I think that only considering SDGs is not enough. So we really have to enrich them with other frameworks or other type of analysis in order to really talk about sustainability. So yeah, it's trying to make more familiar also, or incorporating policies also these other perspectives or dimensions.
Okay, thank you both for that. I think we are going to move on to the second block of the webinar, and it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's Professor Neus San Juan from the Polytechnic University of Valencia. Neus, if you would like to share your screen and your presentation, thank you so much.
Can you see it?
Yes, very clearly. Thanks for that.
So thank you for organizing this nice webinar, and also thanks to the people who is attending the webinar. Well, you can see here the title of my presentation, and also that it has been a group study, as always. We are researchers from Food UPB in Valencia, also from BC3 in Bilbao in Spain too, and from the EASA Institute in Luxembourg in Austria. Well, what I'm presenting is framed in the CLEVER project. Here you can see the underlying question we are trying to answer in this project. How does international trade in agricultural and forest products affect biodiversity? And the idea is to identify new leverage points for a sustainable transformation informed by a holistic approach to quantify biodiversity loss and other impacts in trade of non-food biomass value chains. We decided to focus on non-food biomass because it's like hidden. For instance, what I'm presenting is about soybeans, and we don't used to eat soybeans, but we eat meat, probably, which is created with soybeans. So now I'm beginning with our case study. The case study I'm presenting is embedded in the World Package 6. And we are assessing a Brazilian soy supply chains arriving to Europe from the year 2004 to the 2022, using a life cycle assessment spatial specific approach based on geographical location of soybean farming areas in Brazil and trade data from the TRACE platform. So we decided to focus on soy because over recent decades, the global production and consumption of soy has been greatly increased. And soy now is one of the most widely grown crops in the world, the sixth by production volume, but there is much concern about the sustainability of soy production, in particular because of its link to deforestation. And in Brazil, Brazilian soybean was chosen because Brazil is the main producer and exporter of this commodity. Because of this deforestation, Amazonian biome, as you know, is being destroyed, let's say, deforested. So, and also the idea to use an LCA approach is because it allows us to quantify the impact not only of the farming states, but of the whole supply chain. And in addition, we quantify the following the indicators you can see here, which are closely related with some of the targets of the SDGs. Well, here you can see the indicators and the SDGs they are related to. Well, in the second part of this study, this was really made by our colleagues from EASA, who are also involved in the study, and EASA developed in the past GloBiome, a partial equilibrium model of forestry and agriculture sectors with a spatially explicit representation of farming and the underlying land uses. So the model has been improved with some of the indicators of upstream and downstream impacts of soy, and is also being used by our colleagues to make projections of the impacts of soy based on the shared socioeconomic pathways. Now I'm presenting you the results. I'm focusing on the year 2022, and in that very year, as you can see, more than 40 million tons of soy equivalents were marketed in Europe. And you can see here the scores of the biodiversity footprint, carbon, water footprint, and impact to human health. In this figure, I'm showing you the different drivers we took into account in the calculation of the biodiversity footprint of these soy supply chains. And we can see that land resource demand, habitat occupation or land occupation and transformation is the main driver, has the biggest share, the greatest share. But also we took into account the use of resources, GHG emissions and other pollutant emissions that take place during fertilization, sowing, use of machinery, the crushing and transport. Individually, these other links of the supply chains have a small contribution, but altogether it's also important. And in the right side, we can see the biodiversity footprint of the different producing states. And of course, as expected, Mato Grosso and Bahia and Paraná, which are the main producers and exporters, have the biggest biodiversity footprint. But if we look at the marginal footprint, I mean the biodiversity footprint per ton of soy, then Roraima, Santa Catarina, and Piauí have the greatest footprint. And it happens the same with the importing countries. Well, when I say importing country, I mean the country where the destination port in Europe is located, although the soy can be further distributed to other countries, but this info is not in trace. So the Netherlands, Spain, and France are the main importers and have also the greatest biodiversity footprint. And in this case, Germany, Slovenia, and Portugal has the highest footprint per ton of soy. Well, with the carbon footprint, we can see that fertilization or fertilizer production is the main contributor to this carbon footprint, and also fuel production and combustion for crushing the beans. The states with the highest carbon footprint are the same, of course, the main producers, but the marginal footprint is higher for Bahia, Paraná, and Minas Gerais. And when looking at the importing countries, the ones with the highest carbon footprint per ton are Germany, Poland, and Sweden. Well, as to the water footprint, we can see that the greater share, the share of the lion, is for the production of fertilizers, because in Brazil, soybean crops are rain-fed, so there is no irrigation. And we can see also the countries and states, and the same with the impact of human health. In this case, also the production of fertilizers for agricultural practices have the greatest contribution to this impact. And well, as we use a spatial explicit approach to calculate the indicator, this allows us to generate maps like the ones I'm showing here for the efficiency ratios. Well, as to the deforestation rate, in the picture, we are representing the deforested surface in each soy-producing municipality. Each of these points are a municipality. Per ton of soy equivalent. And then they have been grouped according to the country they import to. And we can see that the deforestation footprint of most of the municipalities is lower, well, in the year 2022, was lower than 0.1 hectares per ton of soy equivalent. And only 7 municipalities have shown a very high deforestation, between 10 and 30 tons per soy equivalent. Well, I have to say that this classification or this scale from negligible to very high is based on the percentiles. It's not a, let's say, official classification. Well, to analyze the interdependency between the indicators we calculated, what we are showing here is the indicators of each, the indicators that we calculated for each value chain have been expressed per ton of soy equivalent, have been aggregated according to the producing state. Well, and I have to say also that Roraima, which is the state with the highest terrestrial biodiversity footprint, is not plotted because the footprint is so high that then the graph is like distorted. So the first thing we can see is that terrestrial biodiversity and deforestation are not always associated. For instance, in the case of Piauí, the second largest biodiversity footprint, has a, let's say, moderate deforestation rate. and really low values for the other indicators. And when we look, for instance, at Mato Grosso, which is the main producer and exporter, well, this is not correct. It should be here, sorry, but it's also low, the deforestation rate, and the other indicators have more or less big values. And when we look at the fresh on board price, that is another kind of indicator, we could gather this data. Differences are minor across the states, mainly because the differences are mainly driven because the differences in the volume and type of commodity. We also try to analyze these results at the importing country level, but interdependencies are not easily identified because countries import soy from different municipalities. Well, in any case, as we observed high variability in these indicators, we decided to apply a cluster analysis, and we identified 3 groups of soy, the ones you can see here. The first one, for instance, has high climate or carbon water footprint and impact to human health, but average values for the other indicators. The second group has average for all the values, and the third group, so low values in carbon and water and human health, and average for price and biodiversity. And we also calculated the performance rank correlation coefficients for each cluster, and we observed, we found both positive correlations and also trade-offs or negative correlations depending on the cluster and the analyzed indicators. I have a slide with the values of the coefficients, but if you are interested, I can show you later. So based on the LCA results, as I told you, GloBiome has been expanded to include the upstream and downstream supply chains, greenhouse gases emission and freshwater consumption of Brazilian soy. And this allows to make calculation with GloBiome that take into account not only farming, but also the other supply links of the supply chain. Well, and it's what our colleagues are doing now is to make projections with GloBiome. What I'm showing here is the projection with the scenario SSP2, the business as usual or middle of the road, it's also called. And we can see, for instance, that for terrestrial biodiversity, it's expected to grow till the 2030, but then it will decrease mainly because land transformation will decrease. And when we look to these 2 indicators, climate change or carbon footprint and freshwater, they are increasing. They are expected to increase in this scenario because, well, although the land transformation, the direct land use change will decrease, the share of the other links of the supply chain are expected to increase. So, to finish, some highlights. The spatially split LCA we are using is a suitable method. We think it's a suitable method to measure the impacts of the supply chains over time. Its integration in GloBiome allows to examine the effectiveness and efficiency of selected alternative policies and governance options in steering these outcomes. As I told you, this is what are the next step or the step that is going that is being done now. As to the results of the footprints, we estimated soy production, when accounting for the entire supply chain, contributes approximately to 17% of the Brazil's carbon and terrestrial footprint, and only around less than 2% to the national freshwater consumption. The biodiversity footprints and other SDG-related indicators, we observed that vary significantly across Brazilian states, municipalities, and also importing countries, which affect their interlinkages. But in any case, we think that addressing biodiversity loss and achieving the SDGs are intertwined and co-benefits outweigh trade-offs. That's all, and thanks.
Thank you so much, Neus, for this really very interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be questions for you, but before we go into the questions, I'd like to invite Jean-Christian to present his research in the context of the BIOTRAILS project. Jean-Christian, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I've just started to share my slides. Is it working for you?
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, my name is Jan-Christian Poulanier-Giese, and I work with a Berlin-based think tank Adelphi. And yeah, we are part of the EU Horizon BioTrails project. So BioTrails is also a Horizon Europe project, which aims to generate knowledge and develop tools that inspire and accelerate biodiversity relevant transformative change in and for society. So it takes into account the complex interrelations between indirect drivers of change in a number of exemplary but important value chains, which include, in our case, cocoa from Peru, gold from small-scale mining sites in Ghana, handicrafts, so cultural handicrafts produced in the Brazilian Amazon, and aquaculture and fisheries from the Mediterranean basin in Greece. So within the project, we identify alongside the value chain the relevant stakeholders. We also identified the social and environmental impacts, and and this is lying mainly with us from Adelphi. We look into the potential leverage points and the driving factors to address in order to put the value chains on a pathway to sustainability and biodiversity conservation. Sorry. So yeah, we are a consortium mainly with European partners led by CNR, Italian Research Institute, but also we have a couple of partners in the case countries. So we have CIAT, which take care of the Peruvian and the Brazilian case study. We have the University of Kumasi, which takes care of the gold value chain in Ghana. And then we have HAPO, which is an association for fish production in Greece. Besides the research partner, we also have like those practical partners. What I will present today is only like one part of the project. So we have also conducted, led by ETH, an LCA assessment on the value chains. We are developing structural equation models. This is a University of Harocopia, for instance, doing. We run a couple of kind of action and learning alliances for the value chain partners done by White Research Institute. And what also, and I will briefly also mention this later on, is that we also look into the interrelations between climate change, biodiversity, and society, and also the implications that certain measures that are at place or that we are proposing have with each other. So we also have like a dynamic system modeling in place, and look into the causal loops. But as mentioned, I want to focus on the leverage point and also look into the connection to the SDGs. So actually, the interconnection to the SDGs is not at the focus of our project, but I think it was an interesting exercise for us to do to look into how what comes out of our study, how this relates actually to the sustainable development goals. But let's take a step back and since not maybe everybody is familiar with the leverage points framework, I would just briefly explain what this is about, and then as a next step, so how we actually applied it. So yeah, the leverage points framework is a theoretical concept from systems analysis. Yeah, it's applied on all our 4 value chains here. Yeah, leverage points, if you're not familiar with this term, it's are kind of points in a complex system where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything. So that's why you have this lever here in this graphic. So yeah, the idea is not what we want to achieve is not to bring like incremental change in the system, but we want to achieve transformative change. And with this framework, we actually kind of use this to also check if we are kind of on a right path. So the leverage points framework is actually it was established by Donella Meadows in 1999, and for our project we used kind of an interpretation for biodiversity. Yeah, this was published by Chen in 2020. And then, of course, we tailor it also further down to our cases. So just to mention a couple of leverage points. So embrace diverse visions of a good life, reduce total material consumption and waste, or unleash latent values of responsibility to enable widespread action. And yeah, to make this more tangible, we also kind of worked together with the stakeholders and looked how we can translate those kind of these terms, those abstract terms, more into their realities of the value chains that they're working on. So as mentioned, we work strongly together with local stakeholders or regional stakeholders. So actually, and I think that's also quite interesting from the discussions we had. So on that the SDGs, are they actually kind of a framework that fits all purpose or fits all sizes? Now we are taking the other perspective. So we look how locally or regionally developed measures can actually then be translated into, or how those can support the achievement of the SDGs. So I think we actually take the other way around here with the help of the leverage points framework. What I want to focus today here is to look deeper into the cocoa value chain, but with all the value chains partners, we have run a couple of workshops where we validated our results from the leverage points, but also from the other models and frameworks that we are applying to see, like, yeah, if our assumptions and our desk research actually work, and yeah, how it can be enriched by this knowledge. The participants of those workshops are mainly producers, but also cooperatives, and also some retailers and policymakers. So to be honest, in our project, we have not achieved to really go downstream entirely, and in some cases maybe we have, but mainly we are focusing more upstream of the value chain, also for practical reasons in that case. Okay, but now let's look into our case here. So we analyze the value chain of cocoa production, particularly in the Ucayali region. So as you know, cocoa is a very important export good for Peru. So they are, I think, the 7th largest producer, and for organic cocoa, they are even the first or one of the main producers in the world. So yeah, it's a major economic activity, and it of course has profound environmental implications, so which lead to deforestation, loss, and the biodiversity, and also we kind of can see that it affects the genetic diversity, and makes more susceptible to pests and also to climate change. Soil degradation is also another issue that has to be dealt with. But as I mentioned, we also have a couple of, or not only a couple, but a meaningful number of sustainable practices like agroforestry that is actually implemented by organic producers. So now let's look how kind of our project connects and our findings connects to the SDGs. So when we look at poverty reduction, so the measures and the policies that are requested from the stakeholders and that kind of are connected to the leverage point. So in this case, the leverage point regional policy on good living is a component in investment projects, which is part of the visions for good life. So this is kind of leading, or is kind of based on appropriate financing from the national governments and regional governments, the promotion of the multi-benefit commercial alliances, which are working ethical, and an increased access to finance and public and private investment. And what we also did in our exercise is, okay, we have the measures, we have what is needed, and now we took a look how it's actually already kind of addressed in policies. So we also looked into, okay, what soft or hard policies do already exist in the countries or for the region, and then as a next step we will analyze, okay, where is it working? So where is a problem with enforcement, or maybe where are even more gaps to find? So where something is not even addressed at all, or it has to be addressed by another measure.
Jean-Christian, I have to ask you to be brief. You'd have a few minutes.
Okay.
So just choose the message. All
right. Yeah. So then I only analyze 2 more SDGs, and I think I did a lot of explanations that were relevant as well. So if we look how it contributes to economic growth and decent work, so based on the leverage points, it was kind of requested that transparency and traceability is one of the main is something that contributes to activate the leverage points, promoting sustainable practices that address market access challenges, also research and development in sustainable technologies, to enhance the production efficiency. Also for this, we found a couple of hard and soft policies in Peru that are at place. This can be supported by this, but keeping in mind that it might not be enough because we still have those biodiversity issues there. And the last SDG we looked at in our exercise is to the SDG-12, which is kind of a very broad SDG. And so I'm just picking out those points of providing education and trainings for farmers on sustainable practices to foster long-term behavioral changes as well, and production, but also same could be accounted for the consumption side, for instance, also trainings and communication on the implications. For this, we also found some evidence in the local and regional policies. So to summarize this, So we have identified a comprehensive set of hard and soft policies to support biodiversity production and consumption patterns in this case country. The problem that we see in many cases is the enforcement and maybe also the lack of further activators for the leverage points. So is the next step, and we will have a workshop soon in Peru at the end of this month, is to further validate the results of our work and look how policies measures can be better implemented or where even gaps exist. And also one exercise that we are doing is to, of course, with the help of our partners, or mainly the partners actually running this, is to look into those interactions between the measures and the environmental and societal developments to really see like, okay, where are strong levers and where we might even have trade-offs and how we can address those. And to summary, like with regards to the SDG connection here, so we see that the outcomes of, or what we analyzed actually supports the achievement of the SDGs 1, 8, and 12. And we think like that value chains hold opportunities to address those SDGs in the same time as addressing the biodiversity issues. Just also more as a broader perspective, how we can better implement this is that in many of those countries that we are looking at, the national biodiversity strategies are still currently under development. So we can use our learnings. We also develop policy briefs to kind of support those developments and bring it into their discussions and then hopefully into the adoption of those plans. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I took a bit over time, but yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
That's really, really great. I think this is a different research project that Neus has presented, but there are certainly commonalities, and I hope that people, our audience, picks on those differences too. The floor is open now for questions. Before, I would like also to propose another poll for our audience and see if there is a diversity of opinion too. I will launch it now. Okay, hold on. And let's see what you think. It is a little bit more connected to economic growth and trade-offs, also with sustainability. And I wonder what people will think. Economic growth should remain the top priority, even if sometimes comes at the expense of environmental protection or social equity. Okay, this is interesting because in the first poll there was a large diversity, and it seems to me that here people tend to disagree, and we agree to disagree on that statement. I will leave a little bit more before going to the Q&A questions, so you have a little bit of time to pose your question and see. Okay, the poll is now closed. Let's go to the Q&A section and see what people have asked. Okay, we have a question here about the concept of sustainable development goal. And I invite any of our panel to answer. The question is, don't you think SDGs should be better defined and framed, not to be wrongly used and applied? it seems sometimes that they are used as a marketing label by many organizations. I don't know if any of you would like to take that question.
Well, I'm not an specialist in SDGs, but I think that when you look at them carefully, I think the definition and the targets and so are well defined. The problem is the way in which we use so easily. It's like the term sustainability, everything is sustainable now. That's my point of view.
John Christian, would you like to comment on that?
Yes. So, like from a marketing perspective, because we also work on a lot on consumer information and communication of biodiversity, for instance. So I would even turn this around. So like at least I would say it's kind of quite well promoted. I also like the way how that we have all those icons and I think it's visually appealing, and I think there is also from the private sector, I would say there's a comparably high uptake on this, and also when it comes to their communication, and I also appreciate that in their SDG or in their sustainability reportings they kind of try to connect to those SDGs, and I also think it's good that they are also so diverse that you can actually also pick where you want to focus on. Of course, the choices have to be relevant, and of course, the impact must also be relevant as well. So it can be. I understand the critique that it can be used for greenwashing, but I think the framework by itself is actually, I think it's quite good and it's quite well defined, and so I would say it's a positive example, actually. Yeah.
Audra or Elizabeth, do you want to chip in, or do we go into the next question?
I think I can briefly comment on that. I just wanted to say that, like in general, SDGs represent very important issues, as I mentioned before. But during my work, like with more like lay people, with the public, I had a feeling that people not necessarily relate these issues and do not necessarily think that, for example, climate change might be related to some social issues, and vice versa, like social issues might actually lead to more climate crisis examples. So I would say that there's like many ways how to promote SDGs. So we can say like from like theoretical perspective, but in general, we can look at to what extent people understand how it's like different practical issues are indeed related. So that's my take. And I think that perhaps we need to do better in our local context, just somehow not only like educating, but really creating the space where people can realize that these links are very real. So that would be my very short comment on perhaps how we could define them better. But it's not like in general, but more contextualized again. Thanks.
Okay, Elizabeth, do you want to comment on that, or we'll go into the next question? Perhaps there is a question addressed to John Christian, I believe, because it refers to leverage points. It says, in reference to leverage point, how do the different value chains transformatively feed into local economies with limited reliance on global markets? Don't know if you like to take that question.
Yes, of course. I actually have to read it again to entirely understand it.
Yeah. So this is the reference to value change.
So I think I don't really understand the last part of the question. So, but I can try to answer it. Because we also have one value chain where we which is actually relevant only for domestic consumption, which is the cultural products value chain. Even though it's not connected to global value chains, in that case, it is very important and a very important value chain, because the products, they are produced in demarcated territories, which are rich in biodiversity, and even though they are not connected to a global market, they play in the regional role. In the region they play a very important role, because the indigenous people who run those businesses, they get an income to make a living, and they are kind of fulfilling the role as a kind of a stewards for those areas, and thereby preventing, when it is actually enforced, so the laws or the regulations, they are preventing that those areas are used for soy production, for instance. Of course, we find many cases where the territories are not respected, but in general, they play a role, because otherwise those areas will maybe not observe that well, will not be the kind of the deforestation will not be reported as fast, and so they are also also with the current government, they also have a visible role. And also, if you look at on the global perspective, you see that in the negotiations of, for instance, of the global biodiversity targets, also in the UNEA processes, the role of indigenous community worldwide is becoming more and more visible, and also more and more respected as an important stakeholder, or not only stakeholder, but an important player to conserve biodiversity. I hope that matched with the question that Isaac had.
I think it matches certainly the next question, which I think I find quite interesting. Is they asking, well, they're saying, as a normal person that maybe wants to do something for biodiversity in my local context, for instance, start a club, how do I connect it with SDGs? Is there tools or some essential tips that you can give based on your projects? Or should I just try doing stuff for biodiversity and not look into SDGs because at the root level it is not that important? I wonder if you have any advice for that. So is it also about the connection between biodiversity and sustainable development? If we can be agents for sustainable development. Yeah, Audra, go for it.
Yes, thank you. I think it's actually a perfect question, because it's very closely related to our local case, and also similar cases that do the same thing internationally. So the good news is that someone from the local community starts any type of initiative. It's already good news, because people tend to interact more with the local stakeholders rather than someone coming from the outside. I don't know, organizations or just people who do not belong to the community in general. So this is a good starting point. And then I think if we want to talk about SDGs, we just simply need first to ourselves to translate these SDGs into very simple examples that people of your community can relate to. For example, in Lithuania case, we are working on river dam removal. And it is important to remove dams because they are responsible for a huge percentage of biodiversity loss of the river, but also of related ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So this means that when we put dams into the river, it might increase up to 80 or 90% loss of the local biodiversity of local ecosystems. So this is the case, right? But we need to translate it and then into very because our kind of case study is river dam removal, so we relate these SDGs. We do not talk about them like in general, but just we took an issue, to pick the issue, and then try to relate to how will biodiversity loss, or for example, we can use like flagship species like fish, because people usually tend to relate easier to something bigger than compared to, for example, microbes or viruses, because people not care that much about these small things. So you can use a flag fish and say fish will disappear, and then how it's going to affect local community or your children. Perhaps your community youth might not be able to enjoy the same benefits of a river than you enjoy. So these, we have like two issues that could be translated into SDGs, but we not necessarily need to talk about SDGs. So this is my kind of a local experience. I hope it helps in some way. Thank you.
Yes, Elizabeth, do you want to
Yes, I can add from BIONEXT that, yeah, I agree that not necessarily you need to translate this into the SDGs, but they will be a contribution anyway. So for example, in BIONEXT, through this different values perspective, we have local actions considered that are key for transformative change. So for example, grassroots movements that start taking the action at a local level and then going up to making these transformations in the system. The same with the stewardship with your environment or with your local biodiversity. So in some, the local actions can scale later, and this is a way of contributing to this, and that are basis for transformative change in many cases. So yeah, that I can say. Thanks.
Okay, John Christian, and then we'll have to wrap up because we are over time.
Yeah, my answer is very, very quick. So if you want to do something for biodiversity and the SDGs, then I think a good way could be to focus on reducing food waste, because that's an indicator that is in the both frameworks, in the SDG framework and in the global biodiversity framework. So they took care that it's interconnected. And I think that is a very tangible way. And then I think as a next step, you could look into, okay, avoiding food waste is one way, but also maybe avoiding certain products or how things have been produced. Then that could be a next step to address biodiversity. But yeah, I think it's good to have local initiatives or to join local initiatives. I think it's really good to actually work on this issue together with a community and not being alone there.
Thank you so much. I think we've reached to the end of the webinar. Thank you for all your contributions. Perhaps if there is anything that you'd like to, as a concluding remark, closing remarks that you would like, a takeaway that you would like to highlight for the audience before we say goodbye. Audrey, would you like to tell us a final takeaway?
I guess I would like to wrap up very quickly with that last idea. So it is very good news if you a local community already started doing something, because people tend to more kind of feel related to local initiatives, not those that come from the outside. So it's not related to my presentation like in general, but just what I learned in my case study. Thank you.
Elizabeth, you want to go next as a final takeaway that perhaps you want to share?
Yes, just emphasizing on this more holistic view about things, because we are working, or we function as a system. So it's good to consider the multiple dimensions simultaneously, and also the multiple inhabitants that we have on the planet to talk about sustainability. So just don't look from the economic side or productivity or that type. So consider different aspects and different entities too. Thanks.
And Nils, do you have a final takeaway? You're muted, I think.
Sorry, in my takeaway message is more or less the same. First, that well, we have seen that focusing on biodiversity has consequences with other social and environmental goals. So I think it's always a good initiative. And it's also an answer to the last question that if they try to address biodiversity, they will address something else. Thank you.
And finally, John Christian, do you have a final takeaway message that you would like to give the audience today?
Maybe it's kind of a learning for me that I actually did or got from participating in this presentation and in this session today is that it's actually it can be quite valuable to connect different frameworks with each other, because some stakeholders might be more attached to one framework, like for instance the SDGs, and the way you can address those stakeholders on biodiversity issues can be through those SDGs and showing them the whole picture, how it's all interconnected, so that for them it also becomes a relevant or a more relevant issue. So I think that is my learning that I took away from this meeting here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the webinar has shown the strong collaboration of the project within the cluster. So I really wanted to thank you for presenting today, and also to the audience for being part of the conversation. I'd like to invite people to reach out to any of us if they want to know more, and I'll wrap up with that. Until then, next time, thank you so much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.